Okay, welcome to the TROOPERS25 Shitty Add-On Soldering Challenge. First off, let's make sure you've got everything. You need the PCB, need some LEDs, 4 LEDs, but I've got one spare. You need some resistors, 4.7k and 220 ohms. And a pin header, 6-pin surface mount. Right, in order to solder you need three things. You need heat, which comes from the soldering iron. You need solder, which we've got here in wire form. And you need flux, which might not be so obvious. So flux, which also comes included inside the solder, but we've also got it available in a pen form as well. Flux allows the solder to flow properly and to wet the surfaces of the metals, and it does this by reacting with the oxides that form on the metals and kind of cleaning them away. And I'll show you how that works. The second thing I want to tell you about soldering is that soldering is not painting. It might be intuitive to sort of add some solder to your soldering iron, like this, sort of melt a bit of solder onto the tip, and then try and, say, transfer it to your joint. So I've got a bit of scrap PCB here. You'll see if I just try and transfer that blob of solder onto the PCB, it does stick, but it doesn't really want to sort of flow and wet the surface that easily. On the other hand, what you should do is just simply use the soldering iron to flow heat into the joint. Oh, and I should say, in order to do that, it's important to have a little bit of solder on the iron, but that's not the solder we're going to use to make the joints. That's just to help the heat flow. You then allow heat to flow into the joint, and then you can just flow solder onto the joint. And you can see now that solder really wants to just flow nicely over the whole surface of the metal like that. So that's the difference between painting and soldering. So another important thing is that solder kind of only works while it's fresh, and that's because of the flux. So if I melt some solder on the iron there, you see that the flux starts to boil away as a plume of smoke. I don't know if that's so visible on the video, but if I feed in lots and lots of solder there, you'll see smoke will rise up. And that smoke will only last so long, maybe 10 or 20 seconds. I've got quite a lot there because it's a big blob. But once that flux has gone, the solder is kind of useless. So that's why you need to regularly clean away the old solder on your sponge. And that also has the effect of cleaning up the tip of the iron. And you want that always to have a little bit of solder on it. That keeps the tip from oxidizing, and it makes it flow heat into the joint. Alright, so let's make a start. I'm going to start with the LEDs. So first off, we're going to solder the first LED. So the way to do this is to put a little blob of solder on pin 1. Like that. Now you see that the LED has a little diagonal chamfer on one corner. That is pin 1, and it goes next to the little circle on the PCB there. So you just see that little ring of metal. That's just indicating which pin is which. So what you want to do here is just heat up that pad and then just slide the corner of the LED into the pad so that the pin is in that blob of solder. And then I'm just going to put a little bit of downward pressure on the LED and just reheat that pad. Oops. So a little bit of downward pressure, and that just makes sure that the LED is nice and flush to the board, which is just going to make your work a little bit nicer, a little bit higher quality, which I think is important. So now we'll do the other three pins. And note that I'm putting heat on both the leg and the pad. And that's pretty much a perfect amount of solder there. So I just refocus the microscope. You can just see there's a nice even meniscus of solder that connects the board, connects the pad to the leg. In soldering, that's pretty much the perfect amount of solder. It kind of less is more, really. If you have a big blob of solder, you can. It's very easy to short two pins together, or and also even if you've got a big circular blob, sometimes you can get a layer of flux on that blob under the blob, and it not actually be connected to the pad on the board. It's just sort of floating on a layer of flux. That can happen as well. So important to not go overboard with your solder, but there's a fair amount of leeway. So I'll solder the other leg. And then I'm just going to go back to pin 1 and add a tiny bit more solder. And the reason for that is not because it really needs any more solder, but it just needs a little bit of fresh flux, because I heated that joint for quite a while I was positioning the LED. The flux will boil away after just a few seconds, maybe 10 seconds of heating. And once there's no flux left, the solder joint is not as high quality. This is how you can get so-called dry joints. So it's important just to go back to that first joint and just add a little bit more fresh solder so that it's nice and shiny. And you can see that indeed it is nice and shiny there, just like the other side. Okay, so we're going to do another LED. Let's do this one next. So same procedure, bit of solder on pin 1, and then pick up your LED, and that's round the wrong way, so just rotate it. Oops. There we go, and you've just got that pin 1 chamfer next to that little circle. So we just heat up the pin 1 pad and just slide the LED into place, and then I'm just going to put a little bit of downward pressure on it just to make sure it's nice and flush, and I'll just make it nice and square as well. Okay, that's good. So again, just heat up both the leg and the pads. You want a little bit of, so first wipe the soldering iron so it's nice and clean, and then put a little blob of solder on the tip, and that just helps you get nice thermal contact with your between the iron and the component. It's a bit like touching a stove with a wet hand. You get a lot more heat transferred much more quickly if the surfaces are wet. Okay, that's nice. Same on that one. Excellent. And again, just go back to pad 1 and just add a little bit of solder to it like that. So it's important not to rush this process whilst you're soldering. There's no reason to be in a rush. Just be nice and slow, calm and precise. Oops, I forgot to add the blob. And it's okay for the soldering iron to be in contact with the work for a decent period of time. That's fine. You're not trying to do this at high speed. And again, just returning to pad 1, just to give a little bit of extra solder. So now flip the board over and we're going to solder our resistors into place. Probably the easiest component to solder on. Going to put the 4K7 resistor on first, 4.7K. So I'm just going to again heat up one pad, flow a bit of solder on. Then we'll just heat that pad up and just slide the resistor into the blob of solder. And then we'll come back, we'll solder the other side. So heating up both the pad and the component leg at the same time. And then I'll just come back to the first joint there and just give it a tiny bit more solder to give it a bit more flux. That looks good. So I'll do my 220 ohm resistor. So again, heat up the first pad, put a little blob of solder on. Try and get it reasonably square. And again, heating up both the pad and the component leg at the same time, just flow on a bit of solder. And then just return to the first pad and just add a little bit of fresh solder. And that's your resistors done. And finally, we're going to do our pin header. So I'm going to put a bit of solder on pin 1. I'm going to grab the component. Try and get this reasonably square because otherwise the UFO won't be square on your badge. About there looks good. Yeah, that looks pretty square. I'm just going to put a little bit of downward pressure on it just to make sure it's nice and flush. Reheat that pad. And now we're ready to solder the rest of the pins. And then just go back to pin 1 again and just give a little bit of extra solder. And there we go. Okay, so what do you do if you make a mistake? Let's say these two legs here end up bridged together. So I'm going to just flow a load of solder on there. There we go. So there you can see there's a big blob of solder that's spanning the two pins, which obviously we don't want. So how do you fix this situation? Well, you want to use some of this stuff. This is called Desolder Braid or Desolder Wick, and it works just like a candle wick. It sucks up the solder via capillary action. It's woven from very thin strands of copper wire, and it's impregnated with flux to make it soak up solder really well. So you just want to cut the end off so that we've got some fresh material. I'm also going to make sure there's plenty of solder on my soldering iron, because you need really good heat transfer for using the solder braid. And you just lay the solder braid on top of the joint that you want to wick up, and then just apply a bit of pressure with the soldering iron, and you'll see that the solder will suck up into the wick, and then after a few seconds you can see the blob has gone, and there's hardly any solder left on the pads now, so I'll just add a little bit of solder again to get us back to where we want to be. And there we go, got two nice solder joints again. So yeah, if you get stuck or need any help, ask one of the workshop helpers, and they'll be happy to sort you out. Right, so we've now got a nice completed shitty add-on. Now you can plug it into your badge, reboot, and you should see some nice blinking lights.